how we do these panels now is to open this up for discussion, and I'm not somebody who's going to say, no speeches, no, you can only ask a question. I think we'd all love to hear folks' comments and ideas. And if you want to give a speech, organize your own panel next year. But bring us your ideas. The point here is, the only reason we're having this discussion is to stop this. It's not to hear ourselves talk or to put ourselves forward as experts. We're here to learn and grapple with what can come out of this forum that really strengthens the people and humanity and justice against what is being done in our name. And so I'd like to see hands raised if you have comments, and I wanted to make at least one comment on the question of terrorism. And we have many activists in the room here, I know. Combined arrest records is probably quite long, and that's a good thing. I just wanted to speak about the question of terrorism, because I guess because the Islamic State and Al-Qaeda are carried out by people in oppressed nations, sometimes I think some of us, not me, are willing to go soft on them and say, well, they didn't really start this. And I think that's the essential point. They didn't. There's an imperialist system here that dominates, particularly the Middle East. The U.S. and Great Britain, in particular, over the last 100 years, set out to control the Middle East for very strategic economic and political reasons, and have basically staked an empire there. And you know, I would argue that ISIS and Al-Qaeda certainly is using the tactic of terrorism, terrorizing a civilian population, and I'm in complete agreement with you that it's retail versus wholesale. They are not in a position to terrorize the whole world in the way the U.S. and the NATO powers have gotten away with for decades. That's really clear. But the ironic thing is that strengthening one strengthens the other. Everything that the U.S. has done in pursuing the so-called global war on terror has actually strengthened. First Al-Qaeda, and then ISIS, and given an argument globally to people looking at the horror that's been carried out and saying, well, somebody's got to come forward and oppose this. And if we do not organize the revolution in the broadest sense, and if we do not organize people to act against what the U.S. is doing and to stop these illegitimate, unjust wars, people are going to be continued, unfortunately, to be drawn tactically to terrorism, and more alarmingly, I think, be drawn into something that purports to be in the name of one of the world's patriarchal religions, and that is, armed political Islam that is incredibly oppressive to women. I would argue not more so than Christianity if you look at world history, but this is not a path to liberation. These imperial governments have got to be stopped. And so I'm really careful to talk about that, the question of terrorism, and just, to clarify things a bit, I just wanted to read this from Bob Avakian. He characterized it this way: what we see in contention here are, on the one hand, historically outmoded strata among colonized and oppressed humanity, up against historically outmoded ruling strata of the imperialist system. These two reactionary poles reinforce each other even while opposing each other. if you side with either of these motives, you end up strengthening both. And so the argument isn't for siding with ISIS, certainly. And I want to be extremely clear. Nobody in this room would do that or is doing that, despite what the fascists are accusing us of. But at the same time, we have no sympathy for this. These people are not, this is not like in 1968 when we could say there actually was a legitimate liberation movement in Vietnam, and many of us supported it against what our own government was doing. It's not this situation. You're not rooting for the caliphate or ISIS to take it over any of these countries, nor are all the people that you met with, I'm quite sure. People want to live their lives in relative stability. I'll call on Elsa Rosbach, who's visiting here and will be part of the panel tomorrow. She's, I don't know who you're representing, but you are a peace activist living in Germany.
Yeah, well, my name is Elsa Rosbach. I grew up in the U.S., went to college here, was also in public television a long time here, but I also lived in studied in Germany in the 60s and also have been living there most of the time since the 90s. And we started in 2013 German drone campaign. I actually work with many organizations in the U.S. and Germany because my role has been to bring the movements together as much as I can. I think that one has to realize that beyond the U.S. imperialism, which is driving the whole imperialist system and which is modeled in some ways in the drone use, of course, of what Israel was doing, of this neo-colonial mentality of, because using this weapon of drones can't really be used against countries that have any kind of air defense, only against, at least up until now. But the U.S. it's driving. We started a movement to stop Germany from getting weaponized drones, and Germany and Europe was extremely critical of the U.S. use of drones. They, in fact, in the European Parliament, they passed a resolution of over 500 to 49, to outlaw targeted killings in Europe, to, in fact, prevent third parties, because, of course, the U.S. uses Ramstein air base and others, AFRICOM, all over Europe for their drone wars, and trying to prevent the proliferation of these drones. And U.S. peace activists have been going and talking to members of the German Parliament about this since 2013 as well. Unfortunately, what has developed is that we're actually seeing not only U.S. imperialism, but a proliferation of drones and an increased also inter-imperialist struggle in which even Europe, as it's terrified of Trump, is saying, well, our answer is to arm more. We need the drones ourselves. We need more nuclear weapons here, and so forth. And so now, one of the things I'm going to be talking about tomorrow is after 5 long years of struggle, and we've had also huge, against Germany receiving a drone, and huge demonstrations, like over 5,000 at Ramstein Air Base in the middle of nowhere last June, huge blockades of Africa. Germany is going to move forward. It looks like it will be very hard to stop to get an Israeli killer drone. And the German pilots are going to be trained in Israel. And they're going to sit in Israel and do the killing from Israel. And the Israeli government is even preventing the German parliamentarians from knowing what weapons are going to be used on these drones. And this is the reason Germany chose the Israeli drone as the first European country to do so, because others have Reapers and Predators. Some have been armed. The U.S. Congress has allowed right away, so did Great Britain, right away armed. After 5 years of struggle, Italy got their weaponizable drones, Reapers. I forget if they're Reapers or Predators. I think they're armed. France and Holland have not yet. But the fact is they want to build a European killer drone by the mid-2025. And the Israelis will help the Europeans with this, the U.S. not. They denied their technology to Europe. So I just want to say beyond that, 3 years ago, only 3 nations had killed with drones. The U.S., Great Britain as an ally of U.S. in Afghanistan, and Israel. This has proliferated to, I think, about 9. Turkey is killing Kurds with drones now. And although Russia and China have not used armed drones yet against populations, they are developing them for this world arms market, which is driving this proliferation. And the U.S. is the head of this, and this is where we're coming into an extremely, not only horrific suppression of oppressed peoples, and further, as you say, just this horrific story of the refugees alone, you know. But we're coming to a very dangerous, also, inter-imperialist situation, potentially, that could really lead to horrible world wars. I'm not saying next year, but within 5 or 10 years, that's the direction it's going, all because the U.S. won't stop.
You can hear more about it tomorrow.
Yeah,
of course.
I also mentioned Ramstein, which is a huge base in Germany. It plays a key role in the U.S. drone warfare because the satellite signals, I mean, maybe you could explain this better, Elsa, go from Hancock Air Base to an air base in Nevada, and then to Ramstein.
That's right.
And then they're relayed by satellite to, you know, those various Middle Eastern and West Asian countries. So Ramstein is critical to this process. And the other point I would make is that Elsa invoked Israel. Israel, for some years now, has been on the cutting edge of drone technology. And they are the major exporters around the world of drones.
I want to add one little point that relates to this. You know, who developed, just like the first to develop atomic weapons were the Nazis, the first to develop drone technology were also the Nazis, because it's for the unmanned air flights like the V-1, the V-2, and it's based on television technology, and which Germany was leading in, which we know from the 1936 first major broadcast, TV broadcast, was of the Olympics under Hitler, you know, the famous Olympics in 36 in Berlin. And so the nature of this technology is aligned with the Nazi mentality. And of course, the U.S. came in and grabbed all this technology after World War II, as did the Russians to the extent they could. And so, well, just adding that point about the nature of this weapon also.
I do want to focus people's thinking on what was raised by
come
both
back.
of the presenters about terror, you know, and the way we kind of framed the discussion, I guess, is quite obvious, but when you're terrorizing people, you're driving them to leave home and risk everything. Yeah.
I would just like to ask, you know, what is the solution? I mean, I spent 10 years as a volunteer after I retired with the American Defense Service Committee working with asylum seekers. I mean, asylum seekers under the American definition are people who escape from their country and ask for asylum in another country. Refugees are people who are selected by the American government, by ORR, from refugee camps and are examined for 2 years before they're allowed into the country. So asylum seekers, even if they come in on a visa and ask for asylum and go to prison for 6 months, 2 years, whatever it is, and then they're either given or mostly denied asylum. I mean, in all the description, I mean, I've heard so many stories that are similar to, I used to translate for the African refugees, the West African refugees, and the stories are always horrendous. And a lot of them have proved them, you know, with scars for the torture and all the rest of it, and still didn't get asylum. But I mean, what is the solution? I mean, America is taking no refugees, and there's all this condemnation of Europe, but how do you deal when you have millions of people coming in? I mean, this country isn't taking any, and they check everybody 2 years before they come in, but we're very ready to criticize other countries that are absolutely overwhelmed. I mean, what is the solution to this? Is it just demonstrating?
Well, okay, I'm going to call on everybody here. Back there?
Well, change the whole system.
Thank you.
Well, first, I mean, we need to have a democracy, for one thing. We don't have a democracy right now. So, I agree. I mean, there's root problems that we need to work on. There are branch problems like protesting and supporting refugees who need help right now. I mean, we don't want to abandon people who actually need help right now, but I think a lot of like-minded groups need to hone in on these root problems, and so we can make some big changes. I mean, everything relates to the fact that we don't have a democracy, that we have too much money in politics, the Citizens United. Everything relates to that. If you care about the environment, about refugees, about so many things that will be solved or will be helped if we can fix some of the root problems. But there's so many different groups doing so many different things, it's hard to hone in.
I think that maybe people have to establish some morality of how people make money. I think this drone business is making another way of making money, like selling cocaine and all that stuff, and work with the regular population to reject these ways of making money. And that will maybe reduce to a more peaceful world and less people seek engaging in narco and killing our policemen and all the mess that is somehow linked to these ways of making money. If you want to make money in something positive, that's great. Let's applaud and support that type of business. If making money is through this kind of ways, which we shouldn't support, but it should be all the population, and it's not in the TV, it's not promoted, it's just encouraging. Now it will be Israel, and tomorrow is this and that, because it's another way, like narco trafficking, of making money that is not being stopped.
Yeah, following on your comments, to me a key thing is the Pentagon budget, which is extremely bloated, and in terms of the money, so much of that budget goes to the corporations, the weapons-making corporations that have a strong interest in keeping the pot boiling. They're able to buy Congress, and Congress goes along with that. And the other point here is that with Israel, it's the U.S. that's giving billions of dollars every year to Israel, underwriting its use of drones in Gaza. And likewise, the U.S. sells billions of dollars of weaponry, very profitable for certain corporations, to Saudi Arabia, which is now bombing the bejesus out of Yemen.
I mean, I am kind of provoked by your question and your comment, in the sense of you're saying that you've done translation for 10 years on a voluntary basis for refugees and asylum seekers, and you've heard many of these stories. And I bet most of us in this room have paid attention to stories when we've heard them. But I feel really clear in my contention that most people living in this country have no frigging idea, no idea whatsoever, except maybe seeing a hashtag or one of those children that washed up on the ocean for a minute, but are not making the systematic connection between people dying and suffering under these horrific conditions and what comes out of Trump's goddamn mouth. I mean, think about it. During the campaign, out of the White House, look, they used the term filth. Pence used the term filth. He went to the Mexican border and he used the term filth. Everybody in Germany would know. Filth is a code word for Jews. Filth is a code word for people you have to exterminate. This is what this government is literally thinking about all the time. How do we target the undesirables? How do we make the rest of the population go along with this? Before Trump came to power, my understanding of a future fascism was something like, well, fascism would kind of be so obvious and so egregious that people would rise up against it. I'm coming to understand much more sharply and clearly now that we have it in front of us, that fascism very carefully makes it possible for a majority to live without much disruption, while focusing on a certain section of people. And right now it's Muslims, it's immigrants, it's LGBT people, it's trans people. I mean, this horrific crimes are being carried out daily right now in the United States. There's Portland, there's a Native American kid run down in Washington last Saturday night by a guy in a pickup truck yelling racial slurs at him. This was all unleashed, a lot of vileness that has been there all along in the founding of America, going back to what Ed was saying. But I don't feel people are putting it together, including people on the left, including progressive people. It's like, oh yeah, you know, people tell me, oh yeah, well, Obama wasn't that good either. What did you want, Hillary? No, I didn't want Hillary. She's not a fascist, okay?
Yeah.
Trump and Pence are fascists. They are advocating the violent suppression of dissidents, of dissent, of not just their enemies, but just their opponents in political life. And part of, you know, I think the contention here is, no, not just demonstrations, but we have a lot to do to wake up, including getting these stories out. Because people sitting in America don't know these stories. Jan?
This has been heart-wrenching. Being reminded, and this is also something that I studied, I'm doing full-time peace movement activist work, 50, 60 hours a week. The tactic that I've been using is to contact legislative directors in the Senate and bringing information to them to bring to their bosses who happen to work for us. I consider the 100 senators to be the sales force for the military-industrial complex. Every single senator is complicit. There's no exception to that. 100 of them are guilty as hell. That is our system. I'm not going to go on for more than another minute, okay? No speeches. But I write a resolution, bring it to the floor of Congress, each of the countries that we are fighting wars in, that you're going to be out of office, even though you're doing good work. We're no threat to them, except for their prestige, their legacy, and that's what I'm focusing on. I'm not going after Republicans in that, I'm going after Democrats who are doing a half-assed job. There is legislation coming which is to ban the President of the United States from using a nuclear weapon in the first attack. That needs to be supported. So I'm writing to people in Congress every single day to make sure that they do that. But in particular, our Congress abdicated their congressional constitutional authority to declare war.
So more on the question of refugees and asylum seekers and political climate being created in this country around them. How do we challenge them? Along the lines of what people have been saying. We're tying it to the war. We're going out to stop the wars, and we're trying to expose to people what is this resting on? what is being done literally. I think you guys did some very effective campaigning at Hancock and we've done this around the country of showing the photos, the few that we could find of people who were killed by US drones in Pakistan and Yemen, at least. There's really stark images of people who have been forced into refugee status by the US wars, there's the issue of Europe, which I know is really critical in Europe, but then here, our sister over here is saying they aren't taking anybody. And then you have the Muslim ban. By the way, how many people besides Ed did go out to the airports in February to protest? And then how many people came out to protest of the Muslim ban or the attacks on immigrants? Yeah, so this is definitely an activist group, and these were very important. I want to let you know what's happening next Saturday in New York City. New York City, the home of the intelligentsia, the most sophisticated city on the globe. Guess what's happening? There's a protest in Foley Square against Sharia laws. Who's doing this? Pamela Geller. Ring a bell? The Gavin McGinnis of the Proud Boys. The newly coalesced fascist street fighters who are #1 white supremacists and patriarchal figures, women haters, you can name it all, are doing a rally in the heart of New York City in Foley Square next Saturday against Sharia law. And what is their argument? Oh, we're not getting free speech rights. The fascists are getting suppressed. They won't let us speak on campus. Ann Coulter and so forth are being protested. They're coming to this city. And, there's sort of a dilemma for us. Are we just going to say, they'll never get anywhere. It's New York. They're not going to have a following. I'll tell you what, they had 200 people come out last week to protest Linda Sarsour giving the commencement at CUNY for one of the grad centers. And how many people did we have counter-protesting? 12. Because it was very hard to get people to understand when they come out publicly on the streets, we have to counter this. So I just want to put this challenge out. It's noon next Saturday, the 10th, and I will be sending information out to everybody. We will be. Who signs up on the email list?
There's already, people organizing against.
Yes, and as there should be. And I hope people here will think about that. And then it isn't just demonstrating, but if we don't have huge demonstrations across this country at the attacks on immigrants and all the other things that are happening, if all of those pieces don't come together and we don't really argue that this administration has to be driven from office, we are not waiting 2 years to see how many more people they're responsible for killing. Then we don't actually have a solution to any of the bits of it, I think.
Well, I don't think it's just this administration. I think this administration is a symptom of a deeper problem. And I want to use the C word.
Yeah.
I think capitalism, our economic system, is at the root of these problems. And how we uproot that, I don't know yet. But I do know when I was working in Greece, it was terribly, terribly painful. Not just to hear the stories, the terrible stories that I took in and they stay with me, but to see the power that don't care. They absolutely don't care. It's just a handful of people, really, and they have all the power to change things, and they don't. It's not in their interest. And I think until we understand that the unifying problem, root problem of all the things we're talking about is the economic system. I would love to hear from people about what we can do about it. I don't know. But certainly to organize, but.
This was going back to something else. So many are not against the droning, but because they say the elimination of the battlefields. And there are those who are actually in favor of our using drones. And how do you change that viewpoint in music? Something else is that how we protested going into Iraq, and that last was really enormous. And what did it do? But more important at this point is, how are people convinced, made to be convinced that what we're doing is wrong? What we're doing is wrong, and the fact that there being fewer battlefields is irrelevant.
You take the fellow in the back corner with the red.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
Yeah.
Apropos of what you just said a minute or so ago regarding capitalism, I think, and apropos of what the woman over here said earlier regarding where do you start? I don't know exactly where you start, but I do know that people are unaware, the average person is unaware of how much of our tax dollars are, how much is devoted to things military. 52%, 54% I believe, and Trump wants to add another 10% to it. I think that sort of thing kind of is arresting to people if you bring that home graphically to them. And this business about war being profitable goes way back to what was the book by the general World War II?
Smedley v. Butler.
Thank you. I think that's one way to approach the big picture, changing the picture of our focus on capitalism and its connection to our extraordinary devotion of tax revenues towards things military. We spend more than the next 7 countries combined on the planet on things military. There's money to be made from it. The whole system is kind of interlocking.
Are you raising your hand, Kat?
I just wanted to point out, terms like, self-interest or economy and things like that. I mean, I've come to think of these words as doublespeak. And I mean, like, the real economy is the planet, people, health, and they've been diverted to have these sort of, what I call genetically modified meanings now. And so I just feel like if we just really call it what it is and call the real economy what it is, instead of referring to it, to the powers that be and the corporations and what their definition of the economy is, then we can kind of start moving towards like reality and what things really are. I mean, it's not in we call corporations and the fact that they're profiting. It's like, right, like they're benefiting, but the reality is they're really not benefiting. I mean, in reality, they're not. I mean, they think they are, but I mean, if we're all not benefiting, no one's benefiting. I mean.
Elsa?
I'm hearing a little disjunct in the room here in one sense, because I'm hearing some people saying, well, we have to convince people and get out and fight in the streets. And I'm hearing some other people saying, but what leverage do we have on our government at all? anymore. I mean, I'm hearing that whatever we think, and even if we could convince more than 50% of the people, although we do not at all have a level playing field in the media or anything else, and what would happen? And I should say, my father was German and was born in Dresden in 1919. He came to England in 38 and then to the US in 39. But he wasn't a resistor. He was in Hitler Youth before. It's complicated. But I do know from my German side of the family that what starts to happen, if people feel helpless, which they did after 1933 in Germany, before they were fighting in the streets with it, but they were feeling that I can't do anything. Then it develops that you have a small minority of very brave people, and particularly at that time associated with the communists, but there were others going up to the high bourgeoisie who are willing to risk their lives. But most people say, as my grandmother would have said, my German grandmother, what can I do? Do you want to be killed? Would you like me to be killed? And this kind of mentality takes over, and ultimately it becomes also a brutal mentality that takes over the whole population in the sense that they don't want to know, because they also don't want to take the risk of themselves being caught in the line of fire. And so there also was the problem in Germany that the communist movement, who had been so deeply betrayed by the Social Democrats, they had worked, which are like the Democratic Party in essence, certainly in Germany to the left of our Democratic Party. But anyway, there was a juncture where they would have had to unite with the Social Democrats. They might have been able to defeat Hitler. But the Social Democrats had the blood on their hands from the World War I, from leader Rosa Luxemburg and all of that. So I see how people kind of look when they say, oh, he writes to all the progressive Pence, and we say, the fact is, we have to find ways to work with everyone that we can and try to bring them also, even if they've been betrayers in the past, somehow to work with us on this incredibly critical moment. We have to have a range of protests, from direct resistance before they had factories and the labor movement could have a huge effect. We don't have exactly the same tools anymore. But we have to remember, how can we work with, I mean, there are some Republicans even that you can work with. There are some who are anti-war. There are a few, and whatever are, anti-US imperialism or appear to be, even though they're gold standard or whatever they are. We have to think that way. Now, I don't know exactly the answer myself at all, but I'm just saying, I'm just looking.
You had me there till you went to the Republicans.
No, I know. No, I'm just talking, no, they are. And actually, we heard last night Glenn Ford saying that now the Democratic Party is the leading choice of the U.S. ruling class, and so forth. I'm just looking at, if you're going to start saying it's fascism is coming or is here, you have to look and see what the terrible difficulties are of resisting it once it is here. That's it.
Yeah, so one of the questions is, how do you break through the paralysis and a certain level of self-delusion where people are feeling like, well, it's really not that bad. We'll wait till 2018. In 2020, there'll be a different president and we can undo some of the damage.
They have to feel that they can actually do something about it. In many cases without too much risk to themselves, although others would take big risks for themselves. And I don't know exactly how to show people the way to that, but I think that's what many people have to feel before they get active.
On the personal level, it seems to me that most people in the U.S. have allowed themselves to become addicted to whatever. Substances, and to consumerism. And many of us have allowed ourselves to become co-opted. We work at jobs, we work at industries where we just can't speak out. We lose our jobs. And then I think most of us here in this country are distracted. We consume entertainment. When you combine these three factors with debt. So many people are in debt. They've maxed out on their credit card, so they can't risk losing their jobs, so they can't speak out. And I think this is these are major cultural factors that paralyze people. If you're in this position, there's just things you can't really think about. I mean, it's very hard to think about things that'll lead you to question the work you do or how you spend your money.
But I think that's a strategy also.
Oh, yeah. Bread and circuses is the distraction.
Yeah.
And
I was just agreeing that I think it is a strategy. And I think the other strategy is to keep the population in the U.S. afraid. We have been taught to fear. And you just read the newspaper and look at headlines. So the Pentagon budget is for our protection, our security, and so fear connected to the distractions and frightening about our jobs and debt. I mean, it's all so connected, but it's a strategy. They know it works. It worked in Germany, and it's working here in the U.S. And I think to be aware of it is perhaps the first step, hard to move to the second.
I think we should be working I think each of us needs to fight against our own fear. I think it's very freeing. I remember when, they call them the Troubles, but Sinn Féin was doing what would now be called terrorist acts all over England. My brother-in-law here was sending money to Sinn Féin. My brother was injured in a bombing at King's Cross. You know, I was very annoyed, very upset, but get over it. And I think we have to fight against our fear of things. And partly by living through wars and so on, you get to the point where you don't worry about it all the time. And I mean, I'm perfectly happy leaving my door open at home. Well, I live in an apartment building. I mean, I often leave my car door. I mean, I think we just have to trust and we have to push ourselves to fight against stuff. First of all, to recognize our fear, and secondly, to fight against it. I mean, it's all, well, particularly here, I notice it's this them and us feeling all the time. Not all Republicans are terrible. We actually have a very good, I don't know if you'll agree, Barbara, but our borough president is very, is Republican. We live on Staten Island, which is Trump country.
yeah,
But I think one has to stop, to fight against our fear and to start looking at who the people are on the other side and maybe to make contact at some point with them.
look, I gotta go with Noam Chomsky. The Republican Party is the most dangerous organization in the history of the world. And notwithstanding that it was the Democrats that used nukes in 1945, the Republican Party now controls, thinking that they are being driven by God, in God's name. They control these nukes. They are the ones that just pulled out of the Paris Agreement, right? Yeah. So, okay, maybe there's individual Republicans that aren't as bad, but they're part of this party and they need to break with it.
Yeah.
I think we really need a situation in this country where those people who find their courage become many, many more. The courage of decades needs to become the courage of the moment. And I want to quote this young guy, Micah Fletcher, who was the one who was not killed on the train in Portland last Friday night, the one who survived, and he said, this is the kind of thing we have to do. He with 3 other men stepped in when these 2 young women were being threatened and vitally harassed by this guy who turned out to have a knife. And he said, this is the kind of thing that this is what we have to do for each other. And these were heroic actions. 2 of them died, one right on the scene and one in the hospital. this is blood, and I'm still saying it, it's on the hands of the Trump-Pence regime, because they are the ones that held political rallies all last year and said, you know, I'd like to see them carried out on stretchers, those protesters. You know, let's go after them. This is coming into the psyche of people living in this country who are already susceptible, many people, right, to being racist, to being male chauvinist. And we really have to be a conscious force that goes against that, that cultivates a different culture and a different spirit. It's quite clear there could be a moment closing, and you never know what that's going to be. If there's a major terrorist incident around the world, or especially in this country, we could find ourselves literally, quickly, without the right to protest. So, yeah.
I think the lady's in the right track. You just told a story of a person with a name everybody knows, everybody's thinking about. If you show stories of these people in Iraq and Syria, whatever, telling the story with their kids, the guy who lost their arm, the mother, and is shown in the media or whatever, as much as you can do that, I think people will start understanding the consequences of bombing other countries and using the drones, more than speaking about capitalists and Republicans and stuff that, you know, it somehow is related, but Democrats also support wars, so you don't know anymore. Is the understanding of the consequences, and by showing specific faces, not only you know, just the voice, the people that you could find and explain how they killed their mother and why they left and stuff.
Many interviews. One of the problems is that the people that I interviewed, you know, they're traumatized and they don't want their faces shown. But if anyone has some contact where I can have the interviews heard or the stories told, I would really appreciate that, because I think you're absolutely right. Most people have no idea the real consequences of these killings that are done for profit, actually.
We know that in Europe, he was going to meet this person and Kurdun and the kid, you know. If this happened, it will change maybe the mind of the people more.
Well, I'd be happy to have the interviews heard and speak to anybody who would like to hear the real stories of how people are absolutely directly affected.
Did you think of publishing them? You know, if you publish them in English, transcribe them, you might even see it translated into different languages.
Thank you for bringing that up, because they have been transcribed. As a matter of fact, right now as we speak, they're being exhibited in France. They've been transcribed and actors are acting them out, which is a very powerful way. But I'm also working on a book based on the interviews.
You have to see the face and the reality and why we know all the people that have been attacked by terrorists in Europe, but we don't know the faces of hundreds of thousands of Iraq and Syria, whatever.
I have other photos we can use.
Well,
Yes, their voices are more important.
So we'll make that available at worldcan'twait.net as well.
Oh, great.
I think that we're trying to convince people about that it's immoral to look what's happening in the world, that it's immoral, the droning and all the stuff that we're doing. That's fine and good, and that's only going to go a certain distance. I think what we really need are clear targets to develop that are not aimed at influencing Democrats or Republicans, but they're aimed at inflicting damage to forces of corporate forces usually that are behind making the manufacture of drones, that people could engage in campaigns in their local communities, similar to the campaigns against Citibank and others for the pipelines that were behind the pipeline. That type of thing where people in our own communities could target and then draw the connection, the implicit connection between those targets that we would then try to get out on a national and international scale, which is the second part of that, is to do this internationally, where sometimes we should give up trying to affect what our government does directly, because they're not going to, through these processes, because they're not going to listen. We have to defeat them. They're not going to change because of what we, change their thoughts because of what we do. We have to inflict enough problem for them that they will change on, they will just do it. So I know in the genetic engineering movement, the U.S. didn't, against genetic engineering, the U.S. didn't block genetic engineering, but the European Union did, partly in the circularity of the movement. So I think we can work with people in other countries to do the similar targets there that will come back and create the type of pressures on our government, not my government, not your government, but and that will in turn cause these changes to start being made. Because I think we're just spinning wheels actually, and even though it's necessary to go out and just chant at buildings and over and over. One more tactical thing, in the demonstrations that were taking place, really great ones in New York right after the coronation, we began people said no ban, no wall, and some of us began adding no war. It's like, just add it in. So when people start chanting it, just add it in as an individual or a group of people, everybody picks it up. It was a no-brainer. People just added it right. It's just because that type of leadership in doing that wasn't there, and so people didn't think to do it. But I don't think people are apathetic. I don't think people are brainwashed. I think that they're just feeling helpless, and we could overcome that.
Can I say, and I don't, you may, I didn't hear the early conversation, but I want to point out, because I'm not a New York City person, I'm a Midwesterner. And like if I walked into our local coffee shop, I am pretty darn sure that people would have names for the people that I'm hearing here. And it was certainly Trump country, and I would say the vast majority of people that I know there are still, we're going forward because he's going to bring change, and things have not been going so well in our neck of the world. But having said that, I saw 700 people in a very, a town of 8,000 people turn out the first time Obama came through. And it was simply, what I saw is great organization by young people on the ground. I mean, I can't tell you the number of phone calls that they were doing months in advance of him coming through. And Iowa sent Obama forward. Hillary, on the other hand, didn't show up in my town. And people notice that. People pay attention to that. The little churches are still so important. The Iraq War, Bush or his comrades sent through a young Iraqi woman who spoke to all the Methodist ladies up and down the southwest part of Iowa. And what did she tell them? She told them that it was great.
The war was great.
The war was great, that they needed it, what was happening. There's no doubt in my mind that she was sent out as a Republican operative at that point in time, but that's all they would get, was from a face, an Iraqi woman. So people are out there in the boondocks where Trump won. And I listened to people in Philly, and I told them right before the election, I said, I'm fearful you people aren't listening to what's happening in the Midwest, and they vote there too. And so I guess, I don't know what I'm saying, but moving out from the same group, Obama knew how to do it. That's what I'm saying. Whatever he did, he broke from the Democratic National Committee, and he took his own people, I believe, out and ended it.
Well, we have a whole nother panel that could go on right here about this. And I do, you're in the right place to talk about capitalism having to be defeated. My concern, and I've been working on that virtually my whole life, is that right now we are in, if we don't stop this fascist regime, we are not going to be in a position to do that. Now, I'm not saying that from all is lost, but we have to take them very, very seriously. I just want to indicate to everyone, we'll have this report at worldcan'twait.net. We will have further steps that we'll harvest from you all in going forward. World Can't Wait is doing another workshop at noon in 01 called We Are Not Your Soldiers, with a veteran from Afghanistan and a veteran from Vietnam on how they go into high schools to talk about not signing up to fight U.S. wars. I really want to thank Sallie and Ed, and again, we're here again tomorrow at 10 a.m. in the same room, 101.
And me too.
And Elsa.